Marcus Brennan called, you came. That was the first rule of the Double B. He swung into the saddle of his chestnut gelding, Copper, and rode toward the main house. It loomed at the heart of the valley, a fortress of timber and stone, built by a man who refused to bow to anyone. Inside, the air smelled of leather, tobacco, and the faint sweetness of old whiskey. Thomas found his father in the study, standing behind an enormous oak desk, cluttered with ledgers and maps. The walls bore trophies of elk and buffalo, silent witnesses to Marcus Brennan's victories. The old man's gray eyes, sharp as steel, lifted when Thomas entered. Sit, Marcus ordered. Thomas obeyed. His father held a letter in his weathered hand. Do you know what this is? Marcus asked. No, sir. It's from Judge Thornton in Cheyenne. The railroad's coming through. Marcus placed the letter carefully on the desk. With it come changes, big ones. The old handshake deals aren't enough anymore. We need protection, alliances, political power. Thomas stayed quiet. His father didn't like interruptions. You're 28, Marcus continued, his tone as hard as the land outside. It's time you took a wife. Thomas stiffened. A wife? Yes. I've made arrangements. 5 families are sending their daughters. The Harrisons, Prescotts, Whitmans, Carmichaels, and Sterlings. Each one brings something the ranch needs. Rail connections, bank support, water rights, political reach, trade routes. You'll meet them, choose one, and be married by Christmas. Thomas felt his stomach knot. And if I refuse? Then you can leave, Marcus said flatly. Start your own, spread somewhere, without the Brennan name or a single dollar from this ranch. The words struck like a lash. Thomas rose, the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders. I need time to think. You have 1 week, Marcus said. The ranch is bigger than both of us. Remember that. Thomas turned to go, but his father's voice stopped him at the door. I know where your mind wanders, boy. That stable girl, Clara. She's got no family, no dowry, no future. She's not wife material for a Brennan. Thomas's hand tightened on the doorknob. She's more than that. Marcus's eyes were cold. Pretty faces and kind hearts don't build empires. Go on, son. Think it over. Quote. Outside, the sunlight hit him like a slap. He didn't head back to the range. His feet carried him toward the stables, the only place that had ever felt like peace. The Double B's stables were the pride of the ranch. 50 stalls, polished tack, the smell of hay and horses filling the air. Inside, Clara Morrison was working with a young mare that no one else could handle. She moved slow and calm, her voice a low murmur, her touch steady. At 19, Clara had been on the ranch for 6 years, an orphan girl with nothing but a recommendation letter and a willingness to work. Her dress was plain and patched, her hands rough from labor, yet she carried herself with quiet grace. She looked up when Thomas's shadow crossed the doorway. For a moment, neither spoke. Miss Clara, he said, keeping his tone formal. Mr. Thomas, she replied softly. You heard? He asked. She nodded. News travels fast. Your father's chosen your future. He thinks so. Clara stroked the mare's neck. It's a good thing for the ranch, strong alliances. Is that what you think? Quote, I think, she said quietly, that people like us don't get to think much about what's fair. We just do what's asked. Her voice was steady, but he saw the tension in her shoulders. You should go, she added, glancing toward the open doors. People might talk. Let them. She turned then, eyes meeting his, brown, steady, and filled with the kind of sadness that comes from knowing how the world works. You can say that because you're Marcus Brennan's son. I'm just the girl who mucks out stalls. We live in different worlds, Thomas. We always have. He stepped closer. That doesn't mean... Yes, she cut in. It does. She brushed past him, smelling of hay and sunlight. He wanted to stop her, to say everything he'd swallowed for years, but the words stayed trapped. I haven't chosen anyone yet, he called after her. At the door she paused, her silhouette framed in the afternoon glare. You will, she said softly. You have to. The Double B needs you to. When she was gone, the stable felt too quiet. Outside, the wind rose, swirling dust across the yard. Thomas leaned against the stall, the weight of his father's empire heavy on his chest. Could love survive under that kind of weight? Could he? As the sun sank behind the mountains, the ranch glowed in gold and shadow. Somewhere out there, his father was planning alliances. And somewhere closer, a stable girl in rags was tending horses by lantern light, never dreaming she'd just become part of a battle between duty and desire that would change both their lives forever. The dawn came soft over the Double B, painting the world in pearl and copper. The ranch was already awake, men heading out to the range, the clang of buckets, the bark of orders drifting across the yard. And among it all moved Clara Morrison, quiet and steady as always, her braid brushing against her shoulders as she worked through the morning chores. She had learned long ago that work was the only thing that dulled the ache of what might have been. Each stall cleaned, each horse fed, each saddle checked. They kept her hands busy and her heart safe. Still, when she looked toward the main house, a flicker of unease stirred in her chest. 1 week. That's what Marcus Brennan had said. 1 week until the 5 families arrived, bringing their daughters for the rancher's son to choose from. She told herself it didn't matter. Thomas Brennan was kind, yes, but kindness was not a promise. And she knew where kindness ended when it met family duty. The sound of boots on hay made her glance up. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. "You're up early," came Thomas's voice. "I've been up since before sunrise," she said, not looking at him. "Horses don't feed themselves." He stepped closer, and she could feel the warmth of him, even through the cool morning air. "About yesterday." "There's nothing to say." She moved to the next stall, her voice brisk. "You have your duty. I have mine. It doesn't have to be that way." She turned to face him, eyes steady, voice calm. "Doesn't it? Tell me, Thomas, what happens if you refuse your father? If you choose someone like me?" Quote. He opened his mouth but said nothing, and in his silence lay every answer she'd feared. Clara gave a small, sad smile. "That's what I thought." She went back to her work, spreading clean straw with practiced motions. "We both know how this story ends. You'll pick one of those fine ladies. You'll build the future your father wants. And I'll still be here doing what I do best, working hard and keeping my head down. You make it sound simple." "It is simple," she said quietly. "Just not easy." She paused, leaning on the pitchfork. "Do you remember when I first came here?" "Of course," he said. "You were 16, scared half to death." "I was," she admitted. "The mission school taught me reading and manners, but not how to handle horses or men like your father." She laughed softly. "Jake found me crying behind the grain shed that first week." "I remember," Thomas said. "I sat with you there until you stopped shaking." 6 years ago, she murmured. "Feels like another lifetime." Quote. Outside, the ranch hands called to one another, the world still moving while their words hung between them. Clara straightened, brushing straw from her dress. "You should go, Thomas. The men will notice." "I don't care." "I do." Her voice was firm again. "People talk, and talk can ruin a woman faster than the truth ever could." Before he could answer, voices echoed from the yard, riders returning from the far pasture. Jake and the hands drove in a group of horses, their hooves drumming like thunder. Clara stepped outside, slipping easily back into her work. She greeted the men, guided the animals into the corral, and within minutes had order out of chaos. Thomas watched her, admiration written plain on his face. "She's got a gift," one of the men muttered. Jake nodded. "That girl was born to gentle wild things." Thomas said nothing. He knew they weren't just talking about horses. Later, as the sun climbed higher, he found her again. She was brushing down a restless colt, her hands steady on the animal's trembling flank. "You never stop," he said. She didn't look up. "There's always work to do." He hesitated, then reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers left a smudge of dust behind. For a moment, she froze, caught between wanting to pull away and wanting to stay still forever. Then voices approached, his father's voice clearly. Her face turned away. Marcus Brennan entered the stable with 2 cattle buyers. His sharp eyes took in the scene. His son, the stable girl, the careful space between them that hadn't been there seconds before. "Thomas," Marcus said evenly, "you're needed in the study." "Yes, sir." Thomas nodded to Clara. "Miss Morrison." "Sir," she said softly, bowing her head. As they left, Marcus spoke to one of the buyers. "Best investment we ever made. That girl keeps the horses worth twice what we pay her." Thomas said nothing. The word investment twisted something inside him. That evening, after hours of business talk and supper filled with silence, Thomas found himself walking toward the stables again. The lamps glowed through the slats, warm and familiar. Inside, Clara was working with a young filly, teaching her to accept the saddle. The rhythm of her movements was slow and patient, her voice a whisper of calm. "You'll make her trust you," he said from the shadows. Clara didn't startle. She always seemed to know when he was near. "Trust is earned, not forced." He stepped closer. "Like love?" She looked at him then, her brown eyes tired but kind. "Love doesn't put food on a table, Thomas. It doesn't protect a ranch or feed a herd through winter." He took another step, his voice low. "Maybe not, but it's the only thing that makes any of it worth having." "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't say that." "Why not?" "Because it changes nothing." Her eyes glistened in the lantern light. "Your father's made his plans. The brides will come, and you'll smile, and I'll keep my distance like a good employee." He shook his head. "I can't pretend anymore." "Then you'll lose everything," she said softly. "Your name, your home, everything your family built." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Don't make this harder than it already is." A gust of wind blew through the open doors, carrying the chill of the coming night. The lantern flickered between them. "Tell me one thing," Thomas said quietly. "If there were no ranch, no name, no duty, would you have me then?" Clara's breath caught. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, barely above a whisper, "I'd have chosen you a long time ago." She turned away before he could speak again, leading the filly back to her stall. Thomas stood in silence, the smell of hay and heartbreak thick in the air. Outside, the stars began to pierce the dark, bright and endless. Tomorrow, 5 carriages would roll down the road from Cheyenne, carrying polished women with perfect smiles. But tonight, all he could think about was a stable girl in rags who had just told him everything he'd ever needed to hear and everything he might never have. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The first carriage appeared on the horizon just after noon, a swirl of dust rising behind the polished wheels. By sundown, 5 had arrived, each carrying a family whose fortunes were tied to the Double B's future. The ranch, usually quiet, now buzzed with servants, fine dresses, and the sound of laughter that didn't belong to this land. Thomas stood on the porch, straight-backed, hat in hand, feeling like a man on trial. Inside, his father was playing host with the charm of a politician. The young women were everything Marcus Brennan wanted for his son: beautiful, cultured, accomplished. But to Thomas they looked like strangers from another world, painted in silk and perfume. Dinner that night was a show: crystal glasses, silver cutlery, laughter that rang hollow. The father spoke of railroads and cattle prices, while the daughters smiled and asked polite questions about the frontier. Thomas answered them all, his voice calm and empty. He had learned from Marcus how to perform. Through the kitchen doors he caught a glimpse of Clara, carrying a tray of linens upstairs. She had been pulled from her beloved stables to serve in the house for the guests. Her patched dress had been replaced by a plain gray apron, but her eyes, those deep, honest eyes, gave her away. For a second, they met across the crowded room. Then she looked down and vanished. After dinner came music. The Prescott girl played piano, her fingers gliding over ivory keys. The Harrison girl sang a soft ballad. Sarah Whitman spoke of horses, her one shared passion with Thomas. She seemed genuine, even kind, but her interest was practical. The land, the numbers, the future, not him. By the time the evening ended, Thomas felt like a ghost in his own house. He excused himself under the pretense of checking on a sick horse and stepped into the cool night. The stars were bright, the kind that made a man feel both small and infinite. He walked to the stables, drawn by instinct more than reason. A light glowed inside, faint and warm. He found Clara there, walking a restless mare, her hand gentle on the reins. "You shouldn't be out here," he said softly. She didn't turn. "Mrs. Rodriguez said I pour tea like a farmhand, so I came back to where I belong." He smiled sadly. "You belong more than anyone." "They're beautiful, you know," she said quietly. "All those women, dressed like they stepped out of a dream. They're strangers." She looked at him now, tired but steady. "So was your mother once. And she learned to love your father." Thomas took a step closer. "And what if I can't learn to love anyone else?" Quote. Her voice trembled. "Then you'll lose everything." He shook his head. "No, losing you. That's everything." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The world outside the stable faded. The laughter, the deals, the expectations. Only the sound of horses and their breathing filled the silence. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." But he couldn't stop. He reached for her, and this time she didn't pull away. His hand brushed her cheek, his thumb catching the trace of tears she hadn't meant to show. And then he kissed her, quick, desperate, like a man drowning who had finally found air. When they broke apart, she stepped back, breathing hard. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why make this harder?" "Because pretending I don't love you is harder still." She turned away, wiping her eyes. "You have a duty. Go back to them. Choose your bride." "Clara." She cut him off. "Please, Thomas. For both our sakes." He hesitated, wanting to fight, wanting to promise something he wasn't sure he could keep. But she was already gone, her shadow swallowed by the dark stalls. That night, the ranch was silent, except for the wind whispering through the grass. Thomas didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the letter he'd received weeks ago. The one from the railroad company. They wanted to buy passage through the ranch's east pasture for a spur line. The offer was enough to secure the Double B's future without any marriage alliance. If he could prove it was real, he could finally stand on his own. By morning, he sent Jake riding to Cheyenne to confirm the deal. Then, he dressed for the day like a man with purpose. When Jake returned the next night, he brought news that changed everything. The deal was real, and better than expected. The railroad would pay a small fortune, enough to settle debts, expand operations, and still have money left over. Thomas spent the night drafting the contract, his hands shaking slightly as he realized what it meant: freedom. The next afternoon, Marcus called him into the study. The 5 families were waiting in the parlor, expecting an announcement. "Have you chosen?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Thomas said. "But not one of them." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Thomas laid the contract on the desk. "The railroad wants right-of-way through the eastern fields. It's solid, legal, and it will secure the Double B for a generation." Marcus read in silence. When he looked up, his voice was low and dangerous. "This is about that girl, isn't it?" Quote. "This is about the ranch," Thomas said, meeting his father's gaze. "And about being free to choose my own life." Marcus stood. "Then you tell that to our guests, to their fathers, to every man who came here expecting a union." "I will." Minutes later, the study filled with people, the families, their daughters, their expectations. Clara was summoned too, confused and out of place, her hands still smudged from work. Thomas faced them all. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I thank you for your time, for your kindness, but I cannot offer what I don't have, my heart." The words hit like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Margaret Prescott's face went pale. Mrs. Harrison's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus Brennan's jaw was set like stone. Clara tried to leave, but Thomas reached for her hand. "My heart belongs to her," he said simply. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Margaret's father stepped forward, sputtering with anger. "She's more than that," Thomas said quietly. "She's the reason this ranch runs, the reason it's alive." Marcus's voice broke the silence. "Enough." But before he could continue, Sarah Whitman spoke up. "He's right," she said calmly. "The deal with the railroad secures his future. He doesn't need our alliances. Let him have his choice." Her words diffused the tension. One by one, the families made their stiff goodbyes and left. When the last carriage rolled away, silence settled over the Double B like dust after a storm. Marcus looked at Thomas, then at Clara. His eyes were tired. "You understand what this means? The world will talk. Doors will close." Thomas nodded. "Let them. We'll build our own." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he sighed. "You're your mother's son," he muttered, "stubborn to the end." He picked up a pen and signed the railroad contract. "The ranch is safe," he said. "As for the rest," he looked at Clara, "make sure you're worth what he's giving up." "I'll spend my life proving it," she said quietly. 2 months later, under a bright Wyoming sky, Thomas Brennan married Clara Morrison in a small white chapel overlooking the valley. Marcus walked her down the aisle. Jake stood as witness when the judge pronounced them